We've got good numbers coming in. We've got some people watching on YouTube, which is wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and get started and say good morning, welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our 10th Waiver Reimagine meeting. My name is Leah. I've been contracted to help facilitate these meetings. My colleagues are also here monitoring the chat and taking notes, and members of the DHS team are here listening to your input. So thank you very much for joining us today. And we can go on to the next slide. Welcome again. I hope you're all keeping cool. Thank you. Here's our agenda for today. We've got the Director of Disability Services, Heidi Hamilton, coming to welcome and speak to the group. We'll go through today's meeting objectives. Remember, today is an unusual meeting in that we're not focusing on a particular waiver topic. We are having a project reset. So we've got some new members, we have some new staff members, and today is a project reset to take a look at where the RAC has come from and what the future work is that lies ahead. So we'll take a look at the work of the RAC, and then we'll ask for your input on how you'd like to be involved moving forward. And we will wrap up with some future meeting information. I do just want to acknowledge we understand that some members were a little confused having received a second meeting invite. You may recall that sometimes we had meetings that were 2 hours long, and sometimes we had meetings which were 3 hours long. And we're trying to streamline that process so that you have an accurate meeting invite. We knew today's meeting is not going to go until 1 o'clock. We only anticipate using about 90 minutes of your time today. And so an updated meeting invite was sent out to people. We apologize if that was confusing to some people. We always use the same meeting link. So even if you had the old invite and the new invite, either one of those links is the same link on the website, and that will bring you to today's meeting. As 35 of you have been able to join us, and we know we've got 5 on YouTube, I'm glad you were all able to make it today. So we'll streamline that for future and apologize for any confusion and are very glad that you were here and able to join us today. Let's go on and just review our meeting practices. Here's the link for live captions. So if you need those, please click the link and you will have access to them. And then just reminding people, I'll remind you again later, but when it's time to share with the group, if you could state your name, the question that you're responding to, and just be mindful of speaking slowly so that our captioners can accurately represent what you're saying to other people. So these are part of our meeting practices here. Also, stay present, give your full attention to today's discussion. Please let us know via chat if you need to leave the discussion when you're back. Stay focused on the agenda item being discussed. We will be presenting some information at the beginning of today's meeting, so I will ask you to just jot a note down of any questions or comments you have, and then share those during the feedback session. And then when you are sharing, if you could share your main thoughts and key points early on when speaking so we know what your main topic is, and acknowledge all members have the right to share their ideas and all ideas are valuable. We have another slide here. Be respectful of the process and other participants, including people's privacy. So think about whether or not you need to share a name if you're sharing a story of a personal experience. Listen to other members and DHS with an open mind. Focus on the issue, not the person giving feedback. Assume positive intent, embracing a mindset that will lead to something good. Advocate for everyone, not just your individual situation. We do love it when people share stories and hope that those stories can inform policy. And then Summarize what you've heard from somebody to ensure you're understanding before you react to somebody else's comment. And finally, we have another slide about our chat guidance. Be mindful of the distracting nature of chat messages to both presenters and other members, and use chats to add to the conversation when you're unable to directly share your thoughts. So we have received comments from members who use screen readers that excessive chat during a meeting is extremely distracting to them. A screen reader reads all the chats. So just as if you were in a meeting and you verbally voiced your comment that you're writing in chat to somebody's screen reader, it interrupts what the presenter is saying and presents there. So use the chat to add to a conversation. And if it's not needed in that conversation, make a note of it for later. We want to be sure to get everything you have to say. All right, next slide, please. Great. Well, it's my pleasure now to introduce to you the Director of Disability Services, Heidi Hamilton, who's going to welcome the group and say a few grounding comments. So Heidi, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Leah. Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi Hamilton. As Leah said, I am the Director of the Disability Services Division. I've been in this role for just a couple months officially, but I've been acting division director since last September and have worked at the department almost 20 years. So I've met a couple of you in a variety of different ways, but I'm looking forward to meeting the rest of you. I wanted to just start by commenting on the passing of Bud Rosenfield. I know he was a real integral member of this committee, and his loss he'll be greatly missed. And I wanted to share that I attended his funeral last Friday and wanted to share with you all that the Bud that you knew in these meetings is absolutely the Bud that his family knew and his friends. It was really nice to hear some of the comments from his children and his wife, just about who the person he was. And he was just a lifelong advocate for people with disabilities, and really was a great partner for us at the department to work with. He was often across the table from us and not always on the same side, but he was just really helpful in moving the conversation forward. And so just wanted to acknowledge his role in this committee, and just know that I understand how hard it might be for you all to think about his passing, and know that we do still need to continue this work and continue it with the spirit that Bud had with this work too. So moving on from that, as Leah mentioned, we're looking at this meeting as an opportunity to reset with Waiver Reimagine. And I want to just let you know how important your input is into this process, making sure that we hear your feedback on the direction that we're heading, and making sure that it really aligns with what you're hoping to get out of Waiver Reimagine. We will share some plans to hear from you all as well as other community members as we move forward in this project. And we're also refocusing, taking a really close look at what the goals are of Waiver Reimagine, and what should be part of the Waiver Reimagine project and what should be related to Waiver Reimagine, but not necessarily part of the project itself. So one of the things that I wanted to go over are the purposes of Waiver Reimagine, which is what's here on the screen here. And the purposes are to simplify the waiver system while maintaining the current level of care and eligibility requirements, to help people access the services and supports that address their needs, to empower people with more choice and control over their services, including self-directed service options, and to provide equitable access to services across waiver programs. each of these are very important, and we want to make sure that we are thinking of these as we move forward with the project. It's very easy to add a lot of things into this project because it is so huge. But we really want to make sure that we are focusing on the things that need to be included. So one thing that we really want to do is build a system that promotes choice and shift the locus of control to the person who is receiving services. And as we transition to that system, we want to make sure that people are feeling supported, people are getting communication on how that happens, and we continue to monitor the system to make sure that we really are supporting people to have more choice and control over their services. One thing that we've decided to do in refocusing this effort is to bring in the support planning and informed choice team more formally. I think they've been part of some conversations, but they will now be an official part of the Waiver Reimagine team at DHS. Self-direction, when we think about self-direction, that is an important component of Waiver Reimagine, but it's also much bigger than Waiver Reimagine. So the self-direction is not within scope of this project, but it is so closely related. And that's an important piece of having the support planning and informed choice team at the table.
Heidi, before you go any further, could you explain who the support planning and the other team are? Because I don't know who they are, and I have a feeling others don't either.
There will be some more information later in the presentation on who the staff are that will be more engaged in the Waiver Reimagine project and how that team fits in. Thanks for the question. And it's one team, support planning and informed choice. That's the name of the team, but they'll provide some more information in a little bit. So at this meeting, the intention is to check in with the members to, as Leah mentioned, just to see how things are going for you, how you want to be engaged going forward, and ground us in the process of what how we want to work forward on this project, Waiver Reimagine, and then to introduce the additional staff that will be engaged. That's all I have to share. And I will be here for the remainder of the meeting as well. So I will be listening in on the conversation.
Heidi, thanks again for joining us today, for being here and for setting the tone for the meeting. We appreciate that. And also for acknowledging the loss of Bud. He'll have big shoes to fill for sure. Thank you. So as we head into the project reset portion of today's meeting, if you could please, while we're going through these next few slides, make a note of any questions or comments that you have, and please bring them up during the feedback portion that we get to. As we start with why are we all here today, this is what is written in statute. So the statute that established the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee lays out these purposes or work of the RAC to assist in developing and providing feedback on individual budget methodology, individualized budget work, the criteria and process, the consolidation of 4 waivers into 2, which this group has done, proposed adjustments and modifications to the streamlined menu of services, the existing rate exception criteria and process, how to support and expand informed choice and informed decision-making. So we're going to meet some new members that are going to talk us through part of that in a bit, and then other aspects of Waiver Reimagine Phase 2. And we can go on to the next slide. So this is the overall very broad Waiver Reimagine policy development process. This group gives their input on a regular basis. They're part of a number of different community engagement efforts, including meetings with tribal nations, There's a consultant that's also doing facilitated focus groups, and there are efforts to engage lead agencies. All of the input from all of those engagement activities then go into developing recommendations. Now, obviously, with the work of the RAC, we will have official recommendations that move forward through the outcomes of these meetings. DHS also has some constraints, some operational and legislative constraints that they must work within. There'll be a public comment period to develop recommendations from, and obviously with waivers being a federal program, there's a federal waiver plan approval process that those recommendations have to fit into. And all of that work and all of those recommendations go into the Waiver Reimagine policy. Okay, next slide, please. This should actually say, instead of RAC overall project, it should say Waiver Reimagine. So remember, Waiver Reimagine is a project that preceded this group and will extend beyond this group. It started in 2017 when DHS started to look for ways to improve waivers. And then in 2019, the legislature approved research on ways to improve the waivers, and community engagement efforts began. That was part of phase 1. In 2021, the legislature approved changing the waivers and formed this RAC advisory committee to advise on the policy to change those waivers. So here we are with the work set out here from 2022 to 2024, working with you, developing recommendations, and then working within the constraints and regulations that guide the work of DHS. And then, as we heard in the previous slide, in 2025, there will be time for public comment. There will be a submission to CMS, and then recommendations will go to legislature for their response. So that's the overall Waiver Reimagine project. And then the next slide breaks down the work that this group has been doing over the past 12 months. So you can see, and I'm not going to read each one, but each one of these boxes represents a meeting that we've had. And it also shows the work that this group has accomplished. So sometimes when we have a long way to travel, we can forget just how far we've come. I'm going to leave it to you and people who have copies of these slides to read what is in the boxes, but just some other achievements that this group has managed over the time that they've been meeting is they discussed the 2 waiver structures for residential and community waivers, spent 6 months reviewing waiver services and identifying services by waiver. After learning about support ranges and service mixes, this group built knowledge around budgeting and rates from members and their experiences. We did some myth busting around current and future budgets, and we have proposed budget exceptions. So as we look forward on the work to do, let's give ourselves a big round of applause, pat yourself on the back, and be very, very proud of the work that this group has accomplished. There's been a lot of complex topics you've had to learn about, and a lot of work that has gone into sharing your thoughts, networking within your networks, and bringing that feedback to this group and sharing your concerns and ideas for moving forward. So applause and thank you to all of you for your efforts there. If that is what is led us to here, let's now take a look at the work in the future. These are the broad topics that this group is going to be addressing in the work moving forward. They've been themed, which means that our future meetings will fall under one of these topics moving forward. So future of habilitation and residential access criteria. There'll be work for the lead agency's roles and feedback on specific program admin functions, simplification changes, developing criteria for moving between the waivers. looking at services in a two-waiver system, which we did, but any adjustments to that will be a future topic. And then a little bit more on budgets, developing information and materials to share information with people and your families about budgets, budget recalibration, and effects on proposed individual budgets. And then we talked a little bit about budget exception policy, which needs to be developed, and the procedures. That will be further in the future. And then we're going to hear very shortly a little bit about how to support and expand informed choice and informed decision-making. And then finally, the group will finalize policy recommendations for reshaping the waivers and then submit those amendments for public comment and finally to CMS. So that's sort of a look forward. We've seen a look back. We can go to the next slide now. Oh, can I just pause back at that slide? I also want to say that as we've had meetings, all of your comments are recorded and carried forward. And so even if we've had a topic in the past that there were some comments that fell outside of that, we do have a parking lot. We are marking those comments and they will be carried forward in future meetings. So for instance, in a previous meeting, a member shared with us thoughts that their child was too disabled to fit into waiver services except through exceptions and carve-outs. And this is a comment that the group has noted and will be carrying that forward to be sure that that is addressed, acknowledged, and we have time to talk about that in future meetings. So all of your comments are being collected, listened to, and will be brought forward into the appropriate meeting. I just want to assure the group of that. Thank you. Now we can move forward to the next slide. So a little bit more about support planning and informed choice in our new team members, and I'm proud to introduce Andrew Johnson to do that.
Hello, again, my name is Andrew Johnson. Heidi mentioned earlier that the support planning and informed choice team was joining today. That includes myself and my colleague, Sarah Bashane. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to camera on quick and introduce yourself.
Hi folks, my name is Sarah Beauchesne, and this is my first meeting with you all. And like Andrew said, we're on the support planning and informed choice team, and my role is to work on the development of informed choice policy. Glad to be here today.
Thank you. And my role in the team is team lead, and so we have other team members and that are deep subject matter experts in policy around case management, support planning, and I'll be bringing their expertise and questions to this discussion. All right, so as shared earlier, the state of Minnesota is expanding informed choice, and we are aligning case management qualifications across the disability waivers as part of moving from 4 to 2 waivers. People in communities, including tribal nations, have shared that we must ensure each person has the opportunity and information they need to make an informed choice. And this includes the expansion of informed choice guidance and training. External partners also shared that as part of aligning case management qualifications, the revised qualifications must support equity in the workforce and must support equity for people receiving case management. This includes revising current training requirements for case managers. In the coming months, we hope to learn the following from the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee. How do you recommend we spread the word to people and their families about the right to make an informed choice? How do you think people would prefer to receive information about their options? What communication paths, forms of information, etc.? What information do you think is critical for case managers to know about informed choice as part of case manager training? How may the support planning process better address the needs of diverse cultures and support culturally informed services? And when thinking about case management training and qualifications, how might we ensure the workforce is representative of the community? How might we ensure that case managers have what they need to understand the lived experiences of others, and how that impacts their support planning and informed choice needs? Thank you.
Andrew, do you want to say just a little bit about yours and Sarah's background and experience?
Sure. Yeah, I have experience as a case manager in my work history, and at both counties and contracted agencies. And I came to the state Department of Human Services around 2017. And I've been involved in projects such as case management redesign, MnChoice's revision, and other efforts such as the Building Your Skills training series for case managers.
Excellent, thank you. Sarah, I don't know if you wanted to say anything to the group. You certainly don't have to, but.
Sure, thank you. I'll just briefly say a little bit about myself for those who don't know me. Years ago, I started in direct service, providing employment supports to people with disabilities. I started that part of my career in Duluth, is where I currently live as well. I have been in the informed choice role since last October, and prior to that, I have spent 7 years as a regional resource specialist for supporting Northeast Minnesota counties with technical assistance for DHS's HCBS waivers.
Excellent.
You just
Thank you
jogged
both.
my memory too, Sarah. I for several years, I also worked as a direct support professional. So I should share that.
Excellent. Well, welcome to you both. We're very happy to have you here. It will add to the richness of discussions and the information coming to and being received from our members. So thank you both for joining us today and for that introduction. We're now going to move on to the feedback portion of our meeting today, and we can go on to the next slide. So this is where, as you have jotted down your questions and your comments, you can ask them. I do see that Kelly has their hand up. We have plenty of time for this, so if you've got several questions and comments, you can ask one and we will cycle back to you. We have heard several times in the past that you want to be involved in meetings, and this is the time for you to tell us how this can be done. These questions, which you see on your screen here, were sent out in a previous survey to members, and 10 members responded to it. There has also been ongoing work with members. Members have had one-on-ones with DHS staff members, and work continues both individually and in group through things like information sessions, which DHS has offered to ensure that you're involved in ways that make sense to you. DHS would love 100% of your feedback and strives to organize meetings to best allow this. As we have new DHS staff members joining us, we are asking these questions of you again. We rely on your feedback and want to remove any barriers to receiving it. So these are 3/4 questions to respond to. What topics are you looking forward to addressing in the coming year? Are there any topics that have been missed? How would you like to engage in our future RAC meetings, and how do you prefer to share your ideas? Do you have an interest in presenting during a RAC meeting in partnership? In the past, we've asked people maybe who have shared personal stories. So those are the questions we're closing. So this is a time for you to ask your questions and share comments and general feedback. It would be helpful for us to track today's question and answer session. If you could please introduce yourself, your perspective, what perspective you're representing on the committee. If you're a family member or from a lead agency, for instance. And then if you could say which question you are answering or responding to, that would be really helpful for our tracking. Kelly, I'm going to call on you. You've had your hand up and been very patient, so thank you for that. Kelly Friesen.
Thank you, Leah. Yes, this is Kelly Friesen, and I am a parent member of this committee. I have a adult son with high functioning autism, and I was looking to get some clarification of our packet back on page 10. Looking at the slides that are listed up there, you know, it says that in 2019, the legislator approved research to look at ways to improve the waivers. And I guess I'm looking for clarification because I've kind of done some research and looking at like the research that was done by HSRI, or the Human Services Research Institute, back in 2018. And, you know, that is really the study that I see that sort of made recommendations for us to come up with 2 waivers out of the 4. And I guess I just want to be really clear because there's people that are watching this on YouTube. And I heard you make a statement earlier saying that this committee helped decide that we were going to go to 2 waivers versus the 4, but that wasn't my recollection. We helped name the 2 waivers, but we didn't really decide to go to 2, and we certainly didn't decide to go to them as they are stated. It was sort of presented to us that there would be 1 waiver based on where a person lives, and or 2 waivers based on where a person lives. One would be either community or at home with family, and the other would be corporate or residential. So I guess I'm looking for clarification on the timeline, because then it went to legislation, you know, in 2021, and the decision was already made again for this to be as is. And, you know, again, this committee didn't decide that, we just named it. And so that's my initial question. I have other questions I can come back to, but if you could just address that, please, for the group.
Leah, you are speaking on mute right now.
I'm going to call on a member of the team. I'm not exactly sure what the specific question is, but I think we have an idea of just addressing the nature of the legislative approval and how we got to 2 waivers. Maybe the question. Is there a DHS
Well,
member who would like to address that?
I guess the question is, and it's more of a comment. I'm asking if the slides are accurate, because the slide says 2019, you know, that there was research approved, but the study actually took place in 2018. So was there more studies that were done? I guess that was one question. And then also a clarification point that this group didn't decide to go to 2 waivers. That was already decided. We just helped name them. And then again, there's been concerns about the 2 waivers based on where a person lives. And, you know, maybe as we're talking about a reset, maybe that's something we need to look about again.
Sure. And hello, everybody. I haven't introduced myself today, but I have been at the majority of these meetings. My name is Megan Lindblom, and I'm Program Integrity Supervisor. I also get to wear the hat today of Historical Advisor. I've had the privilege of working on this work since late 2017. So I wasn't here for the passage of the initial ask on the research, but a few months after. So Kelly, you are correct. I think maybe that was a misspeak on our part. And so, you know, we're human. We're going to say things slightly incorrectly sometimes. So I apologize for that. But the history here, as we lay it out, 2017 is when the legislature asked us to do 2 separate studies. One was about moving all disability waivers to an individual budgeting model, and one was the consolidation of the waivers. And so those 2 things we paired together for resources and just understanding that when you're changing a waiver structure and you're changing a financial structure, those 2 things do need to understand each other pretty well. So we packaged that as one, which is what we now call Waiver Reimagine. So in late 2017, we began a just over a year-long research period where we looked at the development of the individual budget methodology as generally proposed today. There has been some changes. And we looked and researched about different waiver configurations and what was available to us. The outcome of that work towards the end of 2018 was a proposal to the legislature that we consider moving to 2 waivers. There is a ton of background research and reports from HSRI on the Waiver Reimagine website. Not always the most plain language, because again, it's really deep research and we recognize that. And it's one of the things we're working on behind the scenes is to really create materials that are much more accessible to people. So it's a way we can improve and we're working on improving it now. That was brought to the legislature for approval to move forward. And in 2019, that would have been the session that we're talking about here. And the legislature approved an extension of the study period. They wanted us to go back, continue to look, continue to have the questions and refine the work that we have done. That's something that took place from mid 2019 through 2020. I can speak mostly to the budgeting work at that point because that's when my friends in the waiver policy team came on and really took the waiver two waiver structure research on as themselves. So I don't want to speak too much to their work, but I know we continued to look, continue to have questions, stakeholder engagement. Those were all things that went through. And then in 2020, we put together, again, a legislative proposal. And at that time, during the 2021 legislative session, is when the legislature approved the movement to a 2 waiver structure and an individual budgeting model. So it is something that comes initially out of that 17 to 18 study period. It is something that was stakeholder approved at the time with all of those conversations as well. And I know we've had a lot of conversations with this group specifically about, we are at a conversation now in 2023, 5 years on. So sometimes you may have been part of the conversations earlier on, you may have not, and that's sometimes a difficult thing. So I know I want to keep us moving on other questions because there's lots of them, but that is generally the time that we are talking about.
Okay, well, I
Megan,
really do. I appreciate that because this group started in March of 22. So a lot of this stuff was already in place. So that, I guess that's what I'm looking to clarify and just get out to the people that have not been a part of this process since then. So thank you.
And Kelly, I'll apologize to you in the group if I misspoke. The purpose of this slide, which is supposed to say Waiver Reimagine overall, is supposed to show all of the boxes to the left of the one outlined in blue as work that happened prior to this group. And this group's work is from 22 to 24 in the blue box, and then showing the work that is yet to come. So just to acknowledge that work has happened before, that this group is continuing to affect changes and give recommendations on the work, which will continue to move forward. So I hope that has clarified some of your questions. Is it okay, Kelly, if I move on and take a question from the next person raising their hand?
Of course, thank you so much.
Thanks, I'll come back to you if you need to. Next is Pat Wright, and then after that is Phyllis Reller.
Hi, I'm Pat Wright, and oops, I just lost it again. And I am the perspective of, oh my gosh, an advocate in the disability field. I've been on the NCAPS committee as well. And I'm also a self-directee with the CDCS waiver, and my son is also on a waiver. I think that's enough hats for now. And
Yes.
yeah, so the question that I had, and I'm really appreciating also being part of this other state committee that we're looking at, you know, policy infrastructure regarding self-direction, like how this committee seems to be more that, let's see, how can I say this, nuts and bolts, as opposed to like policy, how things might, well, anyway, okay, so I'll just get to my one of the questions that I have, and I can come back again, is clarification. So I have a support planner, and I know during these NCAPS meetings, we also talked about, you know, support planner and, you know, that there's new things coming up. And I'm just wondering, so the support planning criteria that new support planners I'm understanding, or maybe support plannings that want to do, like, will that be offered to everybody, or will that be specialized just for people doing that? And I'm trying to remember the name of, because there's another part to that support planning and that we just heard about from.
Informed choice.
Yes, yeah, like how that is going to go forward. And maybe also part of that is the case management. My case manager, she's a wonderful case manager. I've had her for several years. And she has trouble accessing policy guidelines for self-direction. And so I'm just wondering, might that be clarified also with this new, I don't know whether to call it a department or, initiative or kind of what to call that, but hopefully that's clear. And if it's not, let me know.
So is there somebody from support planning and informed choice who can address that? Sarah?
Sure, thanks for your questions. This is Sarah Beauchesne, Informed Choice Policy Specialist. I'm going to try to answer that the best I can right now. There were some questions in the chat asking about what NCAPS is. And NCAPS, I have to read it because I don't have it in memory. It's the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. And the group that Pat was speaking about is a DHS public engagement group that worked as part of this NCAPS national initiative to provide recommendations to DHS about self-directed services. What I can say is that self-direction, as Heidi mentioned earlier in the meeting, is really being looked at by our division, and it's a project that has scope that some of it may fall in within Waiver Reimagine, but a lot of it falls outside of Waiver Reimagine. So the division is working on a few things, and in the future there could potentially be more options, but definitely the part that the support planning and case management team is going to look at is ensuring that within our self-directed services that we provide case managers and people who are self-directing their services and their families accurate information. So I think what you're speaking to definitely does fall within our team's purview, and we are really looking forward to getting feedback about how we can better provide that information to people going forward. So I hope that kind of summarizes it, and if others from DHS want to speak to that, please feel free. I'll pass the mic.
Pat, does that help address your question?
Yeah, and maybe it's too early to say how the current support planners and the support planners working with, and I keep forgetting what that is.
Informed choice.
Informed choice. If that's going to, and maybe we don't know yet, if those are going to eventually combine into one, or if there's going to be two sets of trainings and rules for the two different groups of support planners, and maybe it's too early to say that. But I'll just mention that on the NCAPS committee, which is, we're actually ending in September, we're doing a storyboard presentation and whatnot with, I think, 18 other states. But what we chose to work on, we were given goals, and what we chose to work on was infrastructure at the state. So we covered that through the last, year and a half working on those goals. And obviously I won't go into a lot of detail here about all of that. But one thing that did come out of it that I'll just mention is we are a policy collaborative charter went to the upper echelons in the state and commissioner last December to create a self-direction peer group to help advise policy at the state, and so that it could be a mutual, when self-directees had questions, we could also ask for clarification from DHS. So I'll just put that out there. There's a lot, we've been meeting every other week for a year and a half, so obviously there's a lot out there, but hopefully good things are coming out of that. And thank you for the clarification. And I guess a lot of it, we just have to wait and see what happens.
Okay, Pat, thank you. I want to be sure that we let other people answer the questions on the screen and other questions they may have. There's a lot of comments in the chat, so it's something that those of us presenting and working behind the scenes are attending to, but the slides are the same that were sent out. We don't have every word on the slide that we're speaking to, so we're adding to that. But the slides are the same. Next with their hand up is Phyllis, and then next after that is Trisha. So Phyllis, would you like to come off mute?
I am. And Megan, I appreciated your history. I'm the history teller here in our agency. And that comes to the point where I'm mentioning that next year is my planned retirement, but I still want to be involved in this. So my name is Phyllis Reller. I work for Western Prairie Human Services as a supervisor of disability services. And I also have I have worked direct care. I was case manager for 15 years at two different lead agencies. And this is a third lead agency that I'm currently working for and supervising in. And I also have a son who's an adult, and he is on the waiver right now, lives in his own apartment, has high medical needs. So I have an interest in continuing after I retire with this group, if it's possible, just to see it to its fruition, since I started back in 2017, I think, Megan, whenever you engaged us lead agencies about budgets. So topics that I'm looking forward to addressing in the coming year. I really want to be a part of the habilitation comments. My primary background is working with people with intellectual disabilities, and I have some ideas and thoughts on the case management training. I really like the direction it's going. I have a very high interest in informed choice. Looking at the statute, it does give specific examples of things that case management should be doing to ensure informed choice, yet the state has still not stretched out its arms or stretched its neck out or whatever to lower caseloads or to define caseloads. I have fairly low caseloads, and the people I work with do great jobs, but to take those extra steps it recommends in statute would be even more challenging. And I really think they need to look at caseload sizes very much like they do in legislation for mental health and child protection. They give no recommendations in our work. And there are counties that have caseloads double the size of ours. And I know that the contracted case managers are double or more than double the size of our caseloads. So I think that that's something the state needs to address, especially if you want us to be skilled in all of these things that we're asking us to be skilled in. So that tells you how I'm interested in being engaged in the future RAC meetings. I would like to, once I retire, which is sometime next summer, I would like to continue to be a part of this as a parent of someone's supporting somebody. And I'd be interested in presenting with the RAC group too. And like Pat, I've been on the NCAPS group, although I've had to miss some of the meetings, and I am pretty excited about the work that we're doing or the proposal that we have. So that's about all I have, I think. So
okay, thank you for sharing your opinion about the case management, and thank you for offering to present with the group. I've made a note of it, so We'll be sure to tap you for future meetings. Thank you very much. Let me just check that I've got the correct. I believe the next person with their hand up was Trisha, and then after Trisha, Rosalie. Trisha?
Hello, everyone. I'm Trisha Brisbane, and I am a parent advocate and on the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee. I have a few different points, but because the nature of our feedback and questions, because of that, I'm not sure that I'm going to have to take you back to what was said a few minutes ago to address it. So please bear with me. So in response to Kelly Friesen's question and Megan's response about the timeline of when this advisory committee came in and who did what and what was done, I believe that the public concern is that this two-waiver system was not something that was truly designed by stakeholders, not approved, designed is what I'm saying. And I think that that is what our public is saying they're concerned with. And so I just wanted to mention that true stakeholder engagement actually involves partnership at all phases of design and development, implementation, and evaluation of all programs and policies. It's not making decisions at a system level and then asking for stakeholders to agree or maybe disagree. And that's something that I've been involved in my other professional endeavors, and I'd be happy to present on stakeholder engagement and family partnership, stakeholder partnership, or anything else that this committee finds helpful. I also wanted to bring up that public concern that I've been hearing in our community is that significant changes are actually happening now to waivers and their implementation. The public perception is that these current changes are due to Waiver Reimagine. So I find myself saying Waiver Reimagine has not been rolled out yet. So I think that there is a strong outcry from the public for DHS to answer why are significant changes happening now. And if you have questions about what these changes are that the public is experiencing, I'd be happy to have further conversations, but people are very concerned and they're thinking that it has to do with Waiver Reimagine. And those are my points that I had.
Hi, I'd like to respond to this. It's nice to speak with you all. I'm Matt Knutson. I'm a supervisor in Disability Services Division, and I've been involved in this Waiver Reimagine Phase 2 since the onset. First, I'll respond to the comment about the two-waiver system, and it was a recommendation. The two-waiver system was a recommendation which came out of the report, which was referenced earlier, that HSRI did, and the research from HSRI, and there was stakeholder engagement through that process. In this group, in the Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee, we've certainly heard you all that a two-waiver system is not your preference. And we're documenting that repeatedly, and we understand that that's not the preference or recommendation of this group, and we'll move forward with documenting that and providing reporting about it to the legislature, who has asked for ongoing reporting out, partly which will come out of this group, that says that the group does not necessarily recommend a two-waiver structure. We're going to completely put that at the front of anything that we do and say that that is not a recommendation that came out of this group. So that's just, I want to make sure that we're transparent and you all understand that that is something that we've heard loud and clear, and we're going to continue to make sure that others hear. Secondarily, I think that I don't really know what changes you've referenced that have occurred recently that are outcomes of Waiver Reimagine, but I would like to hear more about that. And if you can give me some examples or give us some examples, it's certainly things we'll be happy to talk about, discuss in this meeting, and try to figure out what is driving any changes that we're seeing, and really try to fundamentally understand whether or not Those changes are a result of Waiver Reimagine, the first phase, which was service consolidation, or something that people are anticipating is going to happen in the next phase of Waiver Reimagine. We're very open to hearing about those. So I don't know. That's my response. I hope that that's helpful. And
Mr. Knudsen, can I ask for clarification before you move forward?
yeah,
So it's my understanding that we have not rolled out any of Waiver Reimagine as of yet. Is that correct?
that is not correct. There is phase one of Waiver Reimagine, which was a service menu consolidation, and that occurred in January of 2021. So Waiver Reimagine project had three major components. The service consolidation or service menu consolidation was the first piece. And the second two pieces are consolidation of the waivers from 4 to 2 and the individual budgets. So the first phase was a service menu consolidation, because previously different waivers, whether it be a CAT-CADI, BI or DD waivers, and I'm sorry I used acronyms, but I'm hopeful that people are familiar with the waiver plans, had different services depending upon what waiver eligibility people had, and that was ultimately confusing, and people for many years had asked the department to have a common service menu across.
Thank you for, yes, thank you for clarifying that that is the piece that has changed. I will clarify that the public concern involves many changes to their waiver budgets, and how things are being implemented that do not relate to the phase one changes that have been implemented.
Okay.
So just to be clear, there are multitudes of individuals experiencing something very new to how their waiver is being, I'll just say, experienced, that has never happened before, and they are concerned that that has to do with Waiver Reimagine implementation. It's my understanding that these are a bunch of different changes that are happening for other reasons, but I don't know what they are, and it would be nice if DHS could explain. So I'm happy to bring some of those to your attention if you want to have another conversation. But I think that it's a problem that the community feels that these are all changes due to Waiver Reimagine.
Thanks. Please do reach out, and also this is probably a good place to bring some of those topics as well. If you have connections to the community and people are able to give you examples of what they're experiencing, I think that's something we'd be happy to discuss here too.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Trisha. The next hand up I have is Rosalie. After Rosalie, I see Sue Mackert's hand. So Rosalie, would you like to come off mute and either answer a question on the screen or ask a question?
Yep. Matt, don't go too far away. I just want to reiterate what Trisha just brought forward. That, and I'm seeing a very common thread, and this is for the support planner staff that are here as well, and Heidi Hamilton, that there are a lot of counties. I serve southeastern Minnesota, but live in the cities and have many activist friends who are waiver utilizers. I don't want to draw out specifics because I feel like at this point there are players here even at the table that are aware of some of these cases and they're not supporting these activists and individuals. But there's a lot of CDCS budgets specifically where policy is being passed through by DSD straight to support planners and to county staff. And things that have been provided, creative solutions are being stifled. Things that people have had for decades to stay independent in their community on self-direct services are being tossed to the side, and appeals are increasing, and families are already at a point of crisis. People with disabilities are already at a state of crisis with the staffing shortages. That when we talk about equity, when we talk about consistency of the waivers, and we talk about trying to find solutions and good policy to make sure that waivers can be reformed and reimagined to their truest extent, 1 to 2 minutes each meeting of our individual time to discuss or provide information on topics that have already been predetermined. It is really difficult to sit here and know what work has actually been done because we're not addressing the problems that are killing our community members, that are keeping them isolated and segregated. And I joined this group with the hope that we could all address what's practically killing people and what these services are intended to do. And my 2 cents to what the questions are on the slides is that we need to be able to have time to present, specific time carved out to present on what we were hearing from our community and talk about those practical issues that are happening in services, because we have not had the opportunity to take what is practically happening on the ground level and say, rather than we're going to focus on this topic and this is what's been predetermined, what's happening? Like, what is actually happening? Like, we have so many great activists, advocates, and staff from the lead agencies here, and we haven't gotten to that meat. And I really, really hope that moving forward, we can have those frank discussions because we are having conversations in our community. There are really critical issues that if we do not address, regardless of what we decide in policy at present, we are not addressing the fact that our system is crumbling, that people do not have staff, and that people are getting chokeholded really from being even able to utilize their budget in a way that meets them where they're at. And we are turning into a health insurance model, not an actual true integrated model where people can use the money in the way that it's appropriate for them. So that would be my ask about presenting in the future, is that DHS, go ahead and sit back and let us actually take time and schedule that in. Matt, thank you for saying, we will say that the recommendation from us is not a 2 waiver system, but I would say even further to Pat's point in the chat, that it's not just a 4 or 2, it's not the number. It's the fact that we are so focused right now on whether someone's in a segregated situation of residence and how much money is going into that service. And the amount of people that right now at present are being funneled into that, rather than giving more detail, more money, and more opportunity for people to have that flexibility to live on their own in their community and pay all of these staff that are part of these service systems the wage that they deserve. So that's the feedback really that needs to go forward, is not just a 4 versus 2. It's really about the location. And are we truly living into the Olmstead Act? And we're not when we're focusing on location and not looking at where money is going, how it's being used by the providers, and what accountability to the system is going to be put into place. So those are the things that I would suggest to the questions and the topics for this year. And specifically, I have one question and I'll be done, is that I am reviewing the HSRI reports because I have asked questions time and time again about funding, accountability, how providers are using funds and where that's going. And all of the public reports on DHS's website are not labeled congruently. So I am wondering, are there non-public reports that have not been released? And if there aren't, then why did HSRI label their reports the way that they did? Thank you.
Matt, is there anything in particular you'd like to
Okay.
say in response to Rosalie's
Yeah,
issues?
Rosalie, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think that what we're working to, thank you for all the information you provided. What we're working to do here is make a more open forum for further discussion about topics as you just brought up. So we are trying to change the format of the meeting quite a bit so that we're able to better hear from you all. That's really what we're doing today, is resetting and trying to give more of an open forum for people to bring topics forward so we can have further consideration about what's happening and take it back and have it make richer policy development and richer recommendations as we move forward. So we appreciate it. I don't have an answer to the questions about the nomenclature for reporting. I don't really know. I can go back and look. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
As far as the reporting, I think, Rosalie, I'd love to hear from you about where you see incongruencies. These are older reports. There have been a few reports that have been developed since then. They're not plain language. They're not accessible. That is something we can begin to work on, but it could take quite a bit of time, mostly because those were backup research and redos of analysis. So we can continue to work on that. Though I'll say the majority of our research has been aggregated up into the legislative report that was last put out in a more plain language and accessible way. But of course, we can work on doing that. It's just going to take quite a lift to do so, and probably a number of months, to be quite honest with you. So we can get started on that work now. But if you're seeing incongruencies with the reported work that's already out there, I'm more than happy to hear about it. That is the full set of reports. To my knowledge, I'm just quickly scatting my head here, but that's the full report set for the 2017 and 2018, which is the basis for everything like I talked about in my previous response.
So it's not what's within the report. What I notice is that for all the reports that are on the DHS website, they're listed as, report 2.1 or 2.3 or task 3.1, and there's gaps in between that nomenclature of how they're labeled. So I'm wondering, like, why did HSRA label them the way that they did?
Mhm.
And are there, because they don't like line up like a volume series, like
Right.
why are there gaps? Like, are there other reports is the question that I'm asking.
Sure. For the 2017-2018 work, there are not other reports. I think actually, you know what, let me rephrase that. There is one report that is 300 pages long, which is a crosstab of every line of every waiver plan that we had at the time, which they have changed. So there is that one. The accessibility there was going to be months alone itself. So we decided not to post that one because we have such high standards for our posting. However, when you see the 2.1, 2.3, or any one of that, that is referencing tasks on a work list or a work plan. So at the time, we referred to them as study 1 and study 2, but they were done together. 2.1 might be the report itself, but 2.2 may be the stakeholder engagement or conversations that we're holding, some of the research development or surveying that we were doing with our expert panel at the time. So the 2.1, 2.3, any one of those is just really referencing the point with which we were in the work plan. So I apologize if that's confusing to the broader public, but it just has to do with the work that was completed on task versus other work that wasn't reports.
Thank you, Matt and Megan.
Would it
I
be
want to be sure that we,
Leah, can I comment? Just quick.
oh, sorry. Who
This
is that?
Heidi.
Please go ahead. Yes, thank you.
I just want to, Rosalie, I just want to thank you for your comments and being so upfront with how think about. And I know Matt, Megan, and others will take this back and really talk about it. But I really just want to say thank you. Thank you for being so honest.
I appreciate the time today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. That's what today's about. I do want to remind our ask of people to not use chat. If you were in a meeting and you wouldn't verbalize your comments, to interrupt speakers as we're sharing and listening. We have time to hear from everyone, so we want to hear from you. Next up, I have Sue, and then Lisa, and then Elizabeth. Sue, are you?
I am here. Good morning. I'm Sue Mackert, and I work with day service providers. And I appreciate everything that's been said, and I'm interested in the topic of research. I so appreciate the information and the research that DHS shares with us for these meetings. I particularly appreciated the rate exception criteria. And what I would like to see is more of some of the futurist, even though it's a little beyond our scope. And we are dealing with waivers. I don't want us to forget about individuals who may not be on a waiver, because I think it's important as we define opportunities that to recognize that we still have a number of people, particularly in some of our diverse cultures, that are not on waivers for whatever reason. And I think it would behoove us to try to figure out how we reach those communities. I have no doubt that Department of Health, DHS, Department of Education has statistics and numbers that we don't have, and I think it would be helpful for us. I would also like to move on to the second one on how you'd like to engage. I would love to have us have a 1 or 2 in-person meetings, and perhaps with some legislators, as they ultimately are the ones who pass legislation. And even though it is out of our scope and really in DHS's hands, I think it would be wonderful to be able to engage with them so that they know some of the background or reasoning from people in the field as to our ideas and why they're coming forward as part of Waiver Reimagine. So that's all I'd like to say today. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Next is Lisa and then Elizabeth. Lisa Evert.
Hello, I'm trying to, there we go. Need my video. Okay, so I'm Lisa Everett. I'm on the committee as a parent. I have a 25-year-old who has been using waiver services for probably 18 years and primarily CDCS. So thank you everyone for doing this meeting as a whole. I think it's a great time to take that pause and where have we been and where are we going. So I appreciate that, and I do like the idea of continuing to offer these longer discussion times and letting us all share more than usual. We have a lot of education that has happened over our time as RAC. It doesn't always feel like we've made a lot of progress. It's a lot of education for sure, because these things are complicated and very large to work through. So my points, which I could spend lots of time making lots of points, but looking forward to future topics, and we've touched on this already, but I do believe that the training of case managers, lead agencies, whatever term you want to use, I think that is so critical because we've already said it on this meeting. I think Tricia mentioned it. I myself have had it this summer. I've had conversations with families this summer, but we just continue to have that inconsistency across Minnesota where you are leaving lead agencies to interpret and assume and do their best to approve what's appropriate, but the consistency is never there. So I'm looking forward to moving the clock forward on case manager training and being consistent. However, I do have a question within that. I was invited to be part of a communication and design meeting. I think there was multiple meetings started back in February with the DeYoung Consulting Group. Is that, I haven't spent time looking, but is that out there as far as what they talked about and work they completed? Does anybody have that answer?
Is anyone on the DXS team know if the DeYoung group work has been published anywhere or is available anywhere?
This is Adrian. Actually, I could we'll quick weigh in and say thanks for asking that question, Lisa. And sorry, there has been not a lot of follow-up since. That information has not been published because, in fact, through the summer months, the engagement efforts have taken a while to ramp up. So they are beginning to plan these focus groups that were discussed way back in the winter of 2023. So you haven't missed anything, and we're hoping that as the summer ends and the fall begins, you'll have more information about the focus groups that are starting up that DeYoung's facilitating that were informed by those first couple meetings that some of you attended. Does that help?
Yeah, perfect. No,
Okay,
that's exactly
great.
what I was looking for. And sad to hear they didn't make progress yet, but happy to hear that maybe I can actually join them because winter, when they asked initially, it just did not fit my schedule.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And then I do want to say this. I heard this. I was on the Odyssey presentation Tuesday this week, and Heidi, you were part of that. Megan was part of that. I'm still really, really liking the idea that we're going to take a full year to launch MinChoices 2.0, mirror that against what the proposed changes are for Waiver Reimagine. I think that is just such a great way to reach, like, literally the dining room table of all of our waiver users, waiver families, lead agencies, everybody. I always think of it as a kitchen table because that's where I have my meeting every year. But I just think having that full year of here's where you are today, here's where your needs would be met for the future. I think that's important, but where I get concerned is is there any work being done right now on the DHS side to flush out reactions from families, the waiver users, how are we going to collect responses and reactions when all of those individual meetings happen? Has any thought been put into that yet?
Are you talking about MinChoices, Lisa?
Yeah, so as we go through that year of okay, first and foremost, we got to get MinChoices 2.0 working well. I don't know that we're quite there yet, but once MinChoices 2.0 is fully launched and we have full intent to let a year go by so that every waiver user in Minnesota can use 2.0, but then look at how that's going to be impacted with our Waiver Reimagine proposals. So you can see where you are today, but where you're headed and what those differences are going to be. So how are we going to collect the reactions of those families and users and the responses that we get? How will we know if that's going well, the feedback?
Yes, thank you for that question. I don't know if we have anybody from MinChoices present today to be able to answer that.
Okay, well, that will be, I mean, and especially as a RAC committee member, I mean, that's to me where the rubber hits the road is the beauty of being able to see, here's how I get screened and the end result to serve my needs. And here's where the future proposals are going to meet my needs. Where are those gaps? Is it great? Is it terrible? Is it something in between? But I'm just curious, how are we going to capture that? Because aren't we at 15, 20, I don't know how many thousands of waiver users we have in Minnesota. So that's a lot of reaction. And I'm curious how we're going to capture that. So maybe I can come back to that.
Lisa, Curtis Buman here. I just want to address that just briefly. I think that's, you've lighted on my central concern as we move forward. And I'm a manager in disability services overseeing a fair chunk of this work. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we really been thoughtful in including the support planning and informed choice folks in these discussions to build out that capacity. I don't have a direct answer for the specifics of what we'll do, but I think that's something we need to work with you and other RAC members over the course of the next year to figure out, one of the many things. But I think the things I think about is, okay, at some future point, a lot of people are going to see an individualized budget, and it might be the first time they've ever had to worry about that and think about that. How does the support planning process change? How do those kitchen table meetings change? What kind of supports do people need to understand the implications of what they're dealing with? What resources do need to be available, and how do we test to make sure that they work the way we hope that they will, so that people have a smooth transition? All of that is to say that I suspect I'm channeling your concerns. I just don't have answers, simple, direct answers for them right now. But I think that's the work we have ahead. Fortunately, we still have a little runway to do this, but you know how that goes. That gets away from you pretty quickly, so we better be on it.
Right.
I love your question, though. Right on.
Well, and
Thank you, Lisa and Curtis.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, Kurt. I don't necessarily expect the rock solid answer today, but I did want to get that out there that obviously as RAC would be very interested in what those reactions are and the feedback. But in the end, if it doesn't go well over the course of that year, and let's just say it's, you know, even if it's 30%, 40%, those are big numbers. If people aren't happy and it's a poor reaction, and there's no sense in submitting to CMS something that we already know is going to fail. So that's kind of common sense. But anyway, I was just curious where we were at with that. But I guess for now, I just love that we're doing that exercise, if you will. And then I think another thing that could be helpful, I mean, you're doing today's meeting format to draw out conversations, and I know you do evaluations of us as members after every segment, but maybe thinking of surveying us differently in terms of, are all RAC members truly grasping and understanding where we're going? Are we in agreement? Are we comfortable with rolling things out the way they are thus far? And then surveying us on, will we, how will we be part of a legislative presentation and or helping specifically once it's time to submit to CMS. So I'm just going to throw that out for food for thought for future. And then related to that, my last point is, because you have been surveying us as members after most, if not all, of our RAC meetings, but where, I couldn't find this, but is it out there in terms of what is the results of those evaluations of the RAC members? Does that make sense?
Does somebody want to address that? I know we do look at the evaluations in our internal planning meetings. Is that you, Maria?
No, I think Megan was speaking on mute. I thought I saw your mouth moving.
It was. Thank you for that. You know, so much coffee. I still am a little bit behind this morning. So I had a response a little bit to your comments and questions about the Min Choices work as well, Lisa. So I'm going to table that for a second and speak to your question around the surveying or evaluation data. It's not something that we have published. We've had a lot of conversations about that, and maybe that's a future conversation we need to have as a group of how we want to use that. Typically, those questions are asked to make sure that the points that we were trying to help support and the conversations we were having were helpful for the members, and help us plan for the next meeting. You see that reflected in our last our June meeting, in that we had asked a number of questions about how people wanted to have this conversation today. One thing I will say is, if we're going to bookmark having time around our evaluation and how we want to talk about that and how we want to use that information, I'll also note that we get about 5 responses from our 30 members. There are times we get more. I think our high mark might have been 12, but we really aren't seeing members consistently reply to that either. So it's hard to say, yes, let's use this data or let's publish this data, when it really is only a handful of members engaging with that.
Right.
To speak.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we do try to summarize the results either back out via email or speak to them in the meeting, the next meeting, what we heard. So we do cycle that back and do a feedback loop for you all on the committee.
Mm-hmm. So as an example, Lisa, the survey that went out to members on the 3 or 4 questions you're seeing on the slide now was sent out to members, and we did have 10 responses to that. So we always try and bring that back. And I know we use it for planning every meeting.
Sure.
Thank you for asking those. I'm going to move on. We've got quite a few people with hands up, and thank you very much, Lisa, for your input. We'll come back around if you have other points. I have Elizabeth and Lauren next. Elizabeth?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I am disabled myself, as are both my children. One of us is on a waiver and one is on the family grant, but will probably be a waiver, not too distant future. But so I am interested in engaging in the future by having some sessions where we get to bring in concerns that we're hearing from the community, and then not just be told that it's not part of Waiver Reimagine, but if it's not part of Waiver Reimagine, being told precisely how people can engage to get that issue addressed so that we can go back to our community members and say, okay, this isn't part of Waiver Reimagine, but it is part of this process here. And here's the contact information and those kind of things. I would like us to be much more directive about that so that we can, you know, truly have some back and forth. I want to also reaffirm what other people have been saying. I have also been told by many of my colleagues and friends and fellow advocates that they are getting denied things that they've been having for their children for a long time, and that many more hoops, and they're likening it to Social Security Administration, where the norm is that you'll have to appeal at least once to get through disability, and that they believe Minnesota is trying to set it up like that, so that it's like deny everything first, make it more work, more inaccessible. And remember, the parents of a lot of these disabled children are also disabled themselves, and asking them to jump through a bunch of hoops makes it much more inaccessible. So I would like to have some way to bring their concerns forward, but also respond to them. And I also think that one of the concerns that I've heard brought up several times throughout this process that I don't really feel like we're addressing, and we'd like to either have a whole meeting to address or be told where else we can address it, is the fact of that transition between institutionalized care and community, self-care in the community, housing yourselves. People who've had to go to the hospital, have a new disability, need new equipment, and yet they can't get that equipment because they're in the hospital, because they're then on a different, their home services stop. But then by the time they get home, they don't have any of the equipment they need. And, the doctors don't even want to release them because there isn't a way to like lift the patient, or they haven't had, if they had all their home workers have to stop. And so we don't have a good transition system here that is that makes it easy for people to get back home. And I want us to have a whole meeting where we talk about that transition process and how can we make that easier? What do we need? And also, I guess, yes, I understand that we have to answer to the federal system and to legislatures and all those kind of things, but uh, where is the place that we talk about how we're going to advocate for the members in our community? Like, if we as a committee are seeing a problem that's happening over and over and over and over, and maybe Waiver Reimagine isn't the place to solve it, how do we, like someone said, bringing in legislators, how do we then, or how can we engage the federal system and say, listen, how can we get our state, DHS, whatever, to advocate for our members so that we can get that system changed? Because there has to be a process where that happens too. And I understand that not everything's covered under this umbrella, but let's have some good ideas and maybe a chart that we can hand out to people that says, for this issue, this is the process. For this issue, this is the process, because I do believe that many, many people think that what they're seeing, these constant rejections and refusals and denials, sorry, I couldn't get the right word there. They are seeing that as Waiver Reimagine. And if it's not Waiver Reimagine driving that force, then you have to counter that, because you're going to get so much negativity towards Waiver Reimagine if this is what's happening on the ground that's being identified as part of that. So I would like us to address that in the coming year, and to have more places where we can engage some creative brainstorming. And even if it's not something that Waiver Reimagine can do, if we come up with some creative brainstorming that really would make these waivers more accessible and meet the needs of more people, then can't we brainstorm them and then turn them over to somebody who then advocates to the federal system or to, you know, DHS or whoever's responsible for it to start moving that process forward, right? Like maybe it doesn't, maybe the ideas come here because we have come to this place and we get identified in the community as people on this committee. They want to share those ideas with us, and, you know, sitting on them and just saying it's not part of this process, I think isn't serving us well. And I think it will actually hurt Waiver Reimagine going forward. So there's that point. The other point I want to address is those follow-up surveys that you send. I will be honest with you that I can't remember if I've done them. And I don't know if there's a way on the survey, like some surveys that I fill out for my work and stuff, you know, they come to me and then when I go, they get the reminder email, I'll go to it again and it'll say, you already did it. And then I'm like, yay, I already did it. But, you know, I could be one of the people not participating, even though I intend to, thinking I already did it. And maybe it was last month or some other, you know, responsibility I have. And so I'm not sure if there's a way to either make it that we don't get reminders once we've already submitted it, or that when we go to it a second time, that we get a notice that says we already did it. That would make it easier for me because I just don't have good memory. And, you know, that's part of my disability. So it would be nice if, because I always intend to participate and I always feel like I have some things to say or that I want to bring forward something someone has said to me, but I don't always know if I've already done it or not. So that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. There's a lot of feedback there and we appreciate that. I'm not certain on the survey functionality, but that's something we can certainly look into just to verify how that process works. I do know, as somebody who's in the meetings that receives the results of the surveys that the team look at, that if you submitted twice, we'd see those answers represented twice. So if they were similar, we'd be able to identify it that way, I guess, but I'm not sure. I'm just going to pause and ask the DHS team. I know we've been listening and hearing input for about an hour, but if anybody has anything that they would like to comment on or respond regarding Elizabeth's input. Other than we're grateful and we'll use it moving forward.
Curtis here, and I would just add that it's always interesting to hear about the things that Waiver Reimagine is doing for and with folks currently, even though it probably isn't the thing. But I appreciate your comments in that, you know, I think we need to, and we can take that as a team offline, right, and figure out a vehicle for collecting that input and providing clarifications and hooking folks up with the right policy conversations if it isn't Waiver Reimagine. But I really appreciate that, you know, give us that information, feed it to us, and I think we do need to address that and help you guys with that. I'm kind of just rambling here, but I was really reacting to what you said in a very positive way. We need that information, and we'll have to figure out a way to process it and be transparent about feeding responses back to this group, but might need a little offline team meeting to figure that out, exactly what the vehicle for that is.
Hi, Maria, just weighing in real quick on some of that too. We have in the past shared with you some resources on how to stay engaged with other projects and issues, and we can send those out again because I think it does come up, and like you said, Elizabeth, people see you as a area of like, oh, hey, you have DHS's ear, you have DSD's ear. So we can certainly send that information out again for you all to have as resources. And that was in some of our early meetings. So I just want to make sure that we do, you know, we've heard this from you before. We have resources that we've sent out. We can send them out again. I also just wanted to clarify, I don't know what you were speaking to at the beginning, Elizabeth, but was it about CDCS budgets? And I just want to be really clear with this group because it's coming up a lot today. And so, yes, I want to hold space for that, that conversation, but I also want to be really transparent that Waiver Reimagine is not a place where the CDCS budget concerns are being taken into consideration. That is with the CDCS team. They're looking at self-direction holistically. So we will absolutely get this information to that team. And obviously our director is here and we've got some managers and supervisors on as well. But I just want to be very transparent with this group that the CDCS budget specific information is not something that's going to be coming up in some of our future. I know we had started talking about self-direction, and then as this committee brought forth many issues, we realized it ballooned into very much its own needed area of work and expertise. So I wanted to just make sure that that was also affirmed for you all, that you know what's happening with that work.
Thank you, Maria. I want to honor time and also acknowledge that we had 2 different invites. So I see at least 4 hands up. One is from a person who's already talking, 5, 6. I've got 6 hands up. And I want to pause and ask if people are able to stay and continue the listening session.
I'm able to stay until noon. And I'd be happy, even if everybody else has to leave. I feel like the information that I'm hearing is broader than Waiver Reimagine, and just is highlighting for me how we need to really be talking about how can we have better input from people in the community, because it seems like people are using this venue to share what they're hearing, but not necessarily related to this project. So I'm happy to stay till noon, I mean.
Thank you, Heidi and Curtis. Okay, then we will continue. And if you have to leave the meeting, then I would invite you to please send your comments and or questions to the Waiver Reimagine email box. So we are sure to carry those forward. Hands raised next are Lauren and Julie. Lauren, would you like to go ahead?
Hello, I'm Lauren Thompson. I am a client and a community advocate on the county waiver. And first, I just want to raise the point that if we were sent these questions specifically previously in an email or by mail, I never got them. And secondly, I want to raise the point that there's a big difference between giving feedback and recommendations and making decisions. I really appreciated going over the slides, and it was good to look over the work of what we did, but I had a hard time really conceptualizing it as actual accomplishments personally, not to take away from the work of it, because it's hard to say what that's actually going to do. And I understand that some of it might not be in our control or DHS control, but if we are limited and it is what it is, I would at least like to see the parking lot of questions and feedback and where some of that leads to. Next, I would like to raise the point that I would feel more comfortable going forward if there was more structure and accountability for the RAC. I feel like it might be smoother and more supportive for everybody if there was a subcommittee with stakeholders and DHS staff elected by our body to make decisions and input about the RAC that might need to be done in between meetings. This is typical of other state boards and councils, and this is what it's been like in other councils that I've served on. And I would really appreciate entertaining that. So that's what I have to say. And I just want to say that I really appreciate this conversation and what other people are saying too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. just to clarify, when these questions were sent out to you and the other members, they were sent out as part of a survey. Somebody on the team may have a date for that. And then they were also included in the meeting materials, which were sent out before this meeting, and the email about this meeting. So hoping that you received those communications. Otherwise, maybe we need to check that we have your correct contact details.
Okay, I did receive the meeting materials and I did see this slide there, but I did not receive the survey. So I'll follow up with you about my contact details.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your input too. I can say that that's being taken forward as something we will discuss before our next meetings. Next, I have Julie. I do see Kelly. I might ask Kelly if they'd be willing to wait after WA, just to allow everybody a first chance to share. So I
Certainly.
have, oh, did Julie? Julie, are you there, Julie?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
Okay. A couple things. One is I also echo that I'd like to see the parking lot of questions. I think my biggest struggle with this whole process is that I can't make heads or tails of what the scope of this group is in the whole continuum of, if you're looking at it from an individual's perspective, where does this fit in? Because every which way I turn, and I should say I'm the parent of an adult daughter.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
There's barriers and gaps and problems, and kind of back to a number of people have echoed this, but Rosalie's comments that from a boots on the ground perspective, it's just not working due to staffing shortages. And my daughter lost another case manager and is waiting for referrals for, any number of things. And I'd really like to see, and I don't know if this is the right solution, so people can weigh in on this, but just kind of a pause, and maybe we take 4 case studies of actual individuals and map out the entire continuum from, I don't even, how they initially get on one of the waivers, through the min choice assessment, through the budgeting, through the training, through the connecting with case managers, and put on the continuum who the other stakeholders are, because I don't see that we're ever, I've used this analogy before and I don't mean it to be as negative as it sounds, but it just feels like we're rearranging chairs on the Titanic unless we really understand how this is going to practically play out and help where the problems are. And I think it was Maria say, okay, the self-directed budget is no longer part of this. And if it's not part of this, what is it part of? Because if that's what we're moving to, I mean, I can picture my daughter who has some very significant learning disabilities. 2 things about the budget, which I've brought up before, is whatever the number is, how do you get to that? How does she learn to manage that? And then auditing the services and the budgets being spent, I guess. I mean, right now I get pages saying these are being charged to her waiver, and I have no idea whether any of these services have actually even happened, because right now she's without a case manager, without this, without that, yet plenty of things are getting billed. So I really think I'd like to take a pause and really understand all the parts that are inside the scope and outside the scope, and who's involved agency wise, federal, state, county, because that's going to be something the people, our families are going to need to understand anyway. And if we can't understand it, if I can't understand it, I don't know how my daughter is ever going to understand it. So that's just an idea I want to throw out there. And then I agree with the person who talked about the transitions. You know, that could be one of the cases that we look at, is the transition case and who's involved. So those are my comments that I just struggle, and I think my frustrations are every which way we turn, it seems like we're coming up with, well, that's outside the scope. That's outside the scope. And then I just don't understand what it is we're really trying to do here. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I think Megan's going to hop on and say something.
Sure. And Julie, I appreciate your transparency and honesty and asking for what you need. That's a really hard thing to do. And, you know, I'll be the first to admit, in my previous life before working here really wasn't in MA or home and community-based services. So I have pretty recent experience of having to learn that process. And it's such a huge web. Right. And I think so thinking and sharing that would be really helpful, I think, is something we can take back and see how we can approach it, or how we can maybe make it a little bit more plain language for everybody. I do want to call out one of the reasons we brought informed choice and support planning into that conversation is it's such a huge part of what you just asked to learn about too, right? So we're bringing in more people. That doesn't fully answer the question though. So thank you for sharing that. The one thing I do want to call out is kind of CDCS budgets, CDCS self-direction, a floating enigma, right? And I know we've had a lot of conversations about this too, but it's hard to define. And when we talk about in and out of scope, you know, I think one of the things, you know, just to set aside CDCS budgets for one sentence is we often have that conversations ourselves at DHS. This is everything and nothing, and how do we put a fence around it so we can accomplish what we're trying to do without taking on the whole mountain, right? And so when you're feeling that, I want you to know that we're working on that as well, right? And there's never going to be a perfect answer for something this size. However, when we talk about self-direction, I think I want to make it a little bit more clear. When we talk of out of scope, is we really want to talk about self-direction as a whole piece of DSD, not just CDCS and the waivers in this little corner of it, right? We need to understand how we're moving forward with all of that. That helps us create a more consistent program that helps with some of the things that we've heard today, right? People feeling like it's going all over, that the rules are different. We want to create that consistency. And that happens outside of Waiver Reimagine because it's not just waivers, it's more than waivers. But when we talk about that budget piece, we have the individual budget with CDCS today. Those people who are on CDCS today will continue to be in the waiver. They will continue to have an individual budget, but it is the same individual budget methodology that everyone on the waiver will get, right? So I hear that anxiety. How do we know we're going to manage that? What's going on? What's been billed? And those are things yet for us to determine between both the work we need to do around self-direction policy and the work we have to do with you all around what are the requirements with the waiver and self-directing as well. So I just want to make sure that that's really clear, right? The CDCS budget as it is today is really under self-direction. We've got to make sure we have consistency and clear policy for everybody on that. But when we talk about the budget in the future, it does include people who self-direct. So I just want to make sure that's clear. And it's all one budget. It's equal no matter what door you walk in, whether you self-direct or don't self-direct, it's an equal budget. So I just want to really call that out because I know we've struggled with that before. But thank you again for your bravery and transparency of saying, hey, this big picture needs to be painted for us because it helps us understand where we're at. And I appreciate that.
Thank you again, Julie. I want to be sure that we get to people who haven't had a chance to share. And so for anybody who has shared, I'm asking for some grace to allow me to call on people who have not had a chance to share. So I'm going to ask for Wa next.
Hi, thank you. My name is Hua. I'm currently a supervisor, and I'm representing, a lead agency and case management contract vendor as well. I think this whole experience kind of make me realize, and I think, Megan, thank you for, um, I think you showed a great example of what I just want to say, that I think DHS did a very good job of educating on the education component. It's very informative. It's, uh, very detailed in terms of services, in terms of where we're going. Um, and I think you just did it a very good job in terms of that. CDCS is one of the component of it. I also like to be part of, this moving forward. Just looking at that habilitation component of it, budget exception requests, case management training process, support planning. I also feel that, definitely, I think it's that I'm hearing is, really is looking at that understanding of that workflow, from assessment to receiving, to case manager being assigned to receiving services. And so really, I'm asking, should MenChoice be part of this? Maybe could be at one session to talk about assessment. I think that sometimes, as a representative from a case manager is, really that's what we base off in terms of services availability. And it's different to everyone, because everyone has different needs and different, you know, um, circumstance. And so definitely just understanding the MenChoice assessment. I think that's very important. And so looking at that workflow, understanding that workflow, and I believe that the previous, is it Julie or Julia? Um, again, what I'm hearing is that understanding that big workflow from when going and who's getting services, or the process of it. And so I appreciate everybody's comment, who have voiced it, and I definitely agree. Definitely this listening session is need to happen as well.
Thank you, Wa. I'm seeing comments about clarification and comments. I still want to be able to call in people who have not had a chance to speak yet. So I've got Mary and Chad, and then we can loop around and come back to Kelly and Trisha. So Mary Fensky.
Hi there. I'm I have an adult son who has significant disabilities and is on the waiver. I'm on the board of a large service provider, and I volunteer in a number of different ways with adults with developmental disabilities that I assume are probably on the waiver. And my involvement with them is pretty much around rights and what building a quality life for themselves. I have three quick thoughts. First of all, just on the survey, one thing I would appreciate is if when we fill out the survey, other organizations where I do this, sometimes it'll say, do you want a copy sent to you? And then you've done it and you know what you've said, and because we have 2 months between meetings, we've got it all there. So if you could add that, that'd be super. One thing that really helped me, and it didn't answer all the questions that Julie wonderfully brought up here just a few moments ago, but I was listened in on that Odyssey webinar the other day, And it really gave me a big picture of what's going on and how important MinChoices is to the work we're doing here. And other people have talked about that. I think being advised of other kinds of events like this, I'm sure there's something at DHS about the workforce shortage, if we could be involved in that. Because like it or not, these all intersect, and that would be helpful. Having the big picture is really important. And my last point is just the thing I'm really interested in is informed choice and people making, having the information so that they can make decisions and have a good quality life. I was really interested. I was part of that young group too, understanding that people need, and I'm talking about the people that are served on the waiver. These are the ones I'm interested in. I realize family members are important for youngsters, but, for the most part, it's the person themselves that should be making all these decisions. And the people learn in different ways and there are folks out there, there are groups out there that know how to do this. And for DHS to take advantage of some of this learning that's available, I think would be important. Anyway, that's a special interest that I have, and I'd be willing to work with the two people I've forgotten. Sarah,
Andrew and Sarah.
Yeah,
Andrew and Sarah.
yeah, on this sort of thing. So that's it. And someone else can speak now.
Thank you very much, Mary. We've made notes of that. And being that you didn't ask a question that I think needs a response, I want to be sure we get to Chad. Chad?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, my name is Chad Wilson. I'm an assistant supervising attorney with the Minnesota Disability Law Center. So I help a lot with clients trying to access waiver-based services or just get on services or specific services on the waivers. And so I just want to acknowledge I appreciate the kind comments about Bud. He worked at the Disability Law Center prior to being the ombudsman for mental health and development of disabilities. So I really appreciate that. And it's been great to see everybody, I think, channel their inner Bud today and, talk about and make sure we don't forget about what's happening on the ground to people with disabilities as far as, the need for services. And that leads into one of my main concerns with this process is we've talked a lot about, well, that falls outside the scope. And I get we can't talk about everything, but it would be helpful if we would know that maybe if we do make comments about these issues, how are our concerns maybe communicated to other teams at DHS to know what members of this group are seeing exactly. So 3 things that really jump out to me as far as being critical. If we just look at Waiver Reimagine by itself and forget about MinChoices 2.0 and CDCS budgets and the ongoing staffing shortages, as folks have already noted, you're not looking at the full universe of things. You're definitely going to miss different aspects of really impacting the access to services. And so an easy one would be is I definitely think we need to maybe revisit some of the things we've talked about as far as budgets and MinChoices 2.0 as we go forward here to see how it might impact the recommendations that members of this group might have. And so yeah, I just think we can't forget those things. Even if things fall outside the scope, but it'd be nice to know that comments that are made by members of this group, where they go. Because it'd be nice to know they're not just, noted somewhere and never spoken about again. So if there could be a way to have a clear process as to how that information can be communicated to other teams at DHS, because it can be very siloed. So anything we can do to cut down that siloed nature would be fantastic. And, I guess I'll just say, thinking about today's meeting more specifically, kind of a change in process here. We're raising hands, whereas past meetings, everyone kind of had an opportunity to speak. I think maybe it'd be nice to have a little bit of both, where, you have that time where everyone can make their comments. And at the end, maybe if there are more overarching comments, give people that opportunity to maybe raise their hands to clarify or add. Because I was kind of taken aback by, I was kind of waiting for my turn and then realized it changed to raising of hands, which is fine, but just kind of a change there. I wasn't sure, where we were going with that exactly.
Isn't it interesting? So somebody else said they don't like having the time limit, and then you are holding the other side. So I'm sure we'll see both of those in future meetings as best we can. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought as far as best of both worlds, where, I just know some people better communicate if they know, all right, this is going to be my opportunity to say my main points. But, I also agree, time limits don't like, of course,
Yeah.
so if everybody spoke for 10 minutes, we might have time, but, best
Right.
of both worlds, I guess it's just something for the group to
Yes.
think about. And
I know we're at time. Do you have
Okay.
anything else you want to get through to the group chat? And thank you for sharing.
I can do follow-up comments. I don't want to take anyone's time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and condolences. We've got Kelly and Trisha. Kelly?
Thank you. It's Kelly Friesen, and I did put my questions in the chat, but one quick comment I'll make is that I just want to be sure with the Min Choice Assessments 2.0 that's coming out. I'm hoping that we are going to be sure that the Min Choice Assessment is going to mirror what Waiver Reimagine becomes, and that we're not going to make Waiver Reimagine try to mirror what Min Choice Assessments is. So that's just one comment. And then second, we did some voting on services for each waiver back in April of 2023. When are we going to get the follow-up for what the outcome is going to be decided on that? Because most people in the committee said they wanted both services on both waivers. So that's the first question.
Just real quick, I can speak to the Min Choices comment. Min Choices 2.0, like Lisa was saying, this is a full year of data collection, and then we're making sure that the budget methodology aligns with the new assessment so that we have a methodology that relies on the assessment we have today. That's future work, and I know that we talked about that a number of times in our previous meetings and went over that process of how that work will be happening.
Okay.
Thanks, Megan.
I can say, just for your second question, yeah, the service menu question and the voting, we would definitely plan to bring that back to this group again on having the outcomes of those conversations. And we wanted to have this meeting to, when we plan out future topics ongoing, but also incorporating some of the topics that we know we've already, acknowledged that we will be bringing back to this committee. So I guess I can't say for certain that's going to be this fall still, but I know it's a priority and it's still fresh in people's minds. So we can definitely put that front and center of bringing it back to folks.
Okay. Yeah. So the first was just a comment. Then that was my question. The second question I have is, I have an email from March of 2023 saying that CDCS services would be discussed this fall, but now I'm hearing that's not going to be a part of this conversation in this committee. So I'm just wondering why that changed.
This is Megan again, and just for the sake of time, I'll try to answer that. I think we are not quite ready with the policy yet there, and also really acknowledging that what we're being asked from you all is to have this conversation and adjust our sails a bit. So sometimes what we plan to have done isn't going to be done on that same timeline. I think CDCS policy may be one of those things, but also acknowledging the requests you all have for topics as well. So again, this is kind of a moment to stop and shift and acknowledge our working relationship together instead of barreling down with the plan. So sometimes those plans are going to change. The topics will change as well.
Okay. So to clarify, will CDCS be an option to discuss in the future, or will it not?
I think there is self-direction policy, both with the waivers and with the budget, that we will have to consider. Informed choice is also a big part of that, though I don't anticipate that being this time in the fall.
Okay.
Thank you, Megan and Kelly. I'm going to ask Trisha then to share.
For the sake of time, I'll just let you know I put it in the chat, but to address the frustration I think that we all feel sometimes about, are we really partnering together, stakeholders, which includes persons with disabilities and waiver users at the forefront. I think we're all feeling some frustration in how to best partner together to do this together. So it's not something, Waiver Reimagine isn't something that's being done 2 people or for people. It's being done with the people that are going to be using the waiver. And there are best practices that exist around how to do this and how to do this smoothly. And I just wanted to reiterate that I am happy to present or find some other qualified presenter to come in and talk about how to do that. A lot of times at the systems level, it's just a matter of training. I'd be happy to help VHS figure that out so we can all feel, you know, important in this committee and in our advisory capacity. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. Any other responses to the questions that have been posed or questions from members? If not, I just want to acknowledge that we had a really good response from people. We had an hour and a half of feedback and less than 30 minutes of presentation. So this has been very rich and very fruitful to hear these voices. Also, we had top DHS leadership and a full group of people here to hear this. So I know we're going to be retreating to take a look at this, parse it out, theme it, and figure out how to use this in meetings moving forward. So thank you, everybody. Oh, I'm seeing, Pat, did you have an additional question before we wrap up?
Actually, I just wanted to say that I've really appreciated the listening today that has been happening. And I go along with the different things that people have listed in about topics. And yeah, I hope we can have another, maybe every 6 months we can do one of these, like where we've been and where we're going and how people are feeling about the process. So thanks.
Or maybe we even weave it into every meeting so we've got that snapshot of where we are. There's
Cool.
lots of options, but yeah, thank you, Pat. So thank you to everybody for very honestly sharing and for being transparent, and we're trying to do the same. So we're listening to this and we'll bring this back to the table for future meetings. You always have access to this email that's on your screen now, the waiver.reimagine@state.mn.us. So if we didn't get to you or you have another comment or question to share, please give it to that email address so that we can take that account moving forward. And again, thank you everyone for your time. We will send you information about future meetings, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, everyone.
Can I say one last thing?
Sure.
Yeah, so there is a self-direction conference. I meant to say this earlier because our next meeting is the day before it. And you can go on Google Self-Direction Conference Minnesota and be able to find information for those who are interested in finding out more about it. CDCS.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks for that.
Maybe I can send you a flyer, Leah.
If you send it to the Waiver Reimagine, that's the broadest
Okay, sure.
email.
Thank you.
Yeah, send it as an
Okay,
attachment.
great.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Have a good day. Stay cool.
Yeah.
I think even people in Duluth are having a hot day, so I think I'm safe saying stay cool. Yeah. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining. I believe that we do have a different meeting link to be able to go to for our debrief.